The People First podcast is a show centered by people with learning disabilities. For our friends and community, we talk about issues that are important to us and improve citizen people to find out education. This is our way to make a difference and have our voices first.
Welcome back to the People First podcast. This afternoon we've got Inga Julia Reichelt, who is a PhD student from Germany who has been at Leeds for a few years now. Welcome, Inga.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
What are you studying and when did you start?
So I guess that depends on what you define as the start of my study. So I'm a PhD student in sociology and social policy, and generally sociology is understood as the study of society. So, how we create the social world around us, and how society works. And I started studying sociology as an undergraduate student in 2010. And I was in Germany at a small university for 3 years. And then I came to Leeds in 2014, and I did a master's degree for 1 year in social research, which is where they teach you all the methods and ways and tools of how to study society. And then I started a PhD degree in 2015, and I had to switch to part-time halfway through because I'm a disabled person, and as you probably also all know from your direct experience, sometimes things are not very accessible, and that can be quite exhausting after a while. Um, so I switched to part-time in 2017, and now I'm just in the phase of writing up my project, which got a little bit delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in my project, I'm looking at young disabled people's imagined futures in relation to paid work and out of work benefits in England and Germany in comparison. So I talked to some people in England, and I did the photo voice workshop that Luke attended. I talked to some people in Germany, and it's all about how they relate to paid work and how they imagine their future to be, and what are the challenges in relation to paid work, and what are the opportunities or enabling factors.
Why did you decide to do this call?
I knew that there's an academic subfield of sociology called disability studies that is much more widely known in British universities than it is in universities in Germany. We do have some academics who study disability studies in Germany as well, but it's a lot in the area of kind of special education and rehabilitation science, which from my perspective is more about um, making disabled people other and segregating us again, and I don't like that. I always say rehabilitation science is quite often about how to make people more normal, and I don't want to change the disabled person. I want to change the society around the disabled person so that things become more accessible. And that sort of approach to doing things in disability studies is much better established in the UK. And that's why I came here to study disability studies, because in Germany it's not as well known.
Why do you think it's important for people with disabilities to have paid employment?
Well, I think, we could design society in a variety of ways. I think paid employment in itself isn't the most important goal. I think the most important goal for disabled people is always social inclusion and sort of social recognition and just being part of your community or society as a whole, and gaining recognition for your humanity and that you belong. And unfortunately, the way we now organize society, because paid work takes up such a big part of most people's days, especially for working age adults, a lot of aspects of life tend to be centered around the workplace. And even when you're out of work, the Department for Work and Pensions, and in Germany it's similar. The job center expect you to center all of your activities and your time around searching for work. So work is given a lot of weight in today's society, and that's why work becomes sort of or in policy even is often talked about as a pathway to social inclusion. And I think there's different reasons behind that. One is that if people spend so much time at work, if you're not working, that means you tend to be more isolated because there's now fewer places to go that are not connected to a workplace than there were in previous years or decades. So fewer youth centers, fewer neighborhood community centers. And so people end up quite isolated when they're not in paid employment sometimes. But also, obviously, having your own income can be more choice about how to live your life, where to live, what to buy, what to do. And so, obviously, the income that comes with paid employment can give disabled people more choice and can sometimes make their lives more accessible because they can then buy either things they find easier to use or pay someone to give them a little bit of support. So there's a lot of sort of agency and choice that being in paid work can give you. But I wouldn't necessarily see employment in itself as the important thing. It's more about the things that employment can give you access to. And my sort of dream goal would be that we find a way for people to access these things and have these benefits of social inclusion and recognition and connection, regardless of whether they're in paid employment or not.
Why do so many people with disabilities struggle to find paid work?
So there's a few different ways to answer this question. I'll think about how I can make it easiest to understand. So employers are meant to give disabled people equal opportunities. If two people with the same qualifications apply and one of them is disabled, they're meant to give the job to the disabled person who has the same qualifications. They're meant to guarantee reasonable adjustments to the workplace. But I think a problem with a lot of these policies, especially around reasonable adjustments, is that they're retroactive. What I mean by that is, for an employer or a workplace to make an adjustment, a disabled person has to say, hey, I'm facing this problem. I can't use this thing, or this process of how you do the thing at work doesn't work for me. Can you change this process, or can you install a ramp, or can you give me this in Braille? Or essentially, can you change something either about the physical structure of the workplace or about the way in which things are done in the workplace? And then, because it relies on the disabled person asking, disabled people have been socialized to feel ashamed of having to ask for things. So quite a lot of us, and I think this is not our fault, this is partially because society puts so much pressure on us to sort of blend in and be normal. Quite a lot of us try things the quote unquote normal way without adjustments. Very rarely do employers go, oh yeah, you need this adjustment, let me do this for you. And there is technically funding for them from the government to get their adjustments partially funded if they don't make enough money as a company to pay it themselves. But very few people know about those options. And then it's a lot about who is legally responsible for making the adjustment. So sometimes the employer will say, oh, this should be provided by the Access to Work program from the government. And the Access to Work program will say, no, this should be provided by the employer. And then a lot of time passes before anyone decides who is responsible for the thing. Then people question whether the disabled person really needs the thing. And in that time, that process can be very stressful for disabled people. And because that process is so stressful, disabled people then lose confidence in their ability to do things because it's so rare to find workplaces that are really accessible, that are just to your needs. So that's one aspect. I think the other aspect of it is if companies want to make a lot of quick money, there's a lot of time pressure, and frequently when your environment is not built for you, you just need longer to do things because the environment was not built with your needs in mind. And then, of course, there's also the assumption that a lot of people have that disabled people don't have skills, or the skills we do have don't get seen as marketable or worth paying money for. So, for example, a lot of us will be very good at explaining our needs or at being very patient or at anticipating other people's needs because we've had to learn that to navigate the world. But because we're quite often expected to do that for free, like give advice when something's not accessible, because we're often expected to do that for free, the skills that are involved in doing those things do not get recognized as skills. Quite often, I think I give advice to workplaces, universities, people I meet in daily life. And then I think to myself, oh, if a non disabled person gave that advice, they would charge money for it. But because I have the direct lived experience, people expect me to just do it for free. And I think that's not only the case for disabled people. We know that that's the case for a lot of other marginalized people. So, quite often, refugees and asylum seekers are meant to share details about their lived experience and don't get any money or social recognition for the work that's involved in that. Like quite a lot of people who are marginalized or discriminated against in society are often expected to do a lot of quite difficult things for free. And that then makes it more difficult to recognize that you have skills yourself because nobody ever paid you for these skills, and you start thinking that they're just natural things you do rather than things that actually require knowing how to do them. And then you lack the work experience, and it can be quite difficult to sort of get a starting point in onto the sort of work and employment ladder. But if someone gives you a chance and you're able to develop your skills and develop sort of belief in your skills, and they make the workplace accessible to you, then you can be very successful.
All that you just said is absolutely vital, and some people find it very upsetting and challenging, and it can lead to very, very big steps. And we discuss this since I started in 2021. I've learned a lot about myself and other people like me that I never knew before, and it's really altered me, and I have more understanding more now than what I ever did.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of time and energy to understand yourself. And I think people who don't face disabling barriers, they just kind of grow up expecting that things will work for them because they haven't ever been in an environment that was not made in a way that they could easily use. And so a lot of people underestimate how much time and energy it takes to really get a good understanding of how you function.
Plus, as well, it can sort of like knock people's confidence.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the dangers, though, is that the government, I mean, now we have a new government. I don't know if it will be different with the new government, but in the past, some of the stories the government has been saying has centered around this idea of, oh, if only disabled people were more confident, everything would be fine. If only the employers were more confident to employ disabled people, everything would be fine. And from my experience in my research, I very much doubt that that's the case because a lot of the young disabled people I spoke to, they do believe in their skills. It's just that they then end up facing so many barriers in the workplaces and so many discriminatory attitudes from colleagues or managers that they lose their confidence. It's not that they weren't confident enough at the beginning. And also, I think employers just being more confident to employ disabled people if there is not the money to make the adjustments that disabled people need, employers can be as confident as they want. At the end of the day, it comes down to whether a company is willing to spend the money to make an adjustment, for example. And so confidence can be an important part in people's personal experience, but I'm very skeptical of this idea that if we're all only confident enough, everything will be solved.
What can employers do to make work for disabled people more accessible?
So I think, it varies a lot based on what kind of impairment a person has, but like the sort of core things is sort of listen to the disabled person and believe what they tell you about their experience. And when they say that they need an adjustment or a change made, when disabled people start asking for an adjustment, we've already tried the options. And so I think that the core things would be listen to disabled people's experiences, believe them what they say about their experiences, and then work with them through like open and honest, transparent communication to find a solution together, rather than kind of seeing the adjustment request as this like you can ignore or delay or make maybe a little bit of a change and then it will be fine. Like, I think quite often there's a lack of communication, but I think other general things would be things like flexible working times, because a lot of us face barriers in our daily life that are unpredictable. If we need care and support at home, for example, and the care worker shows up late, then we'll be late for work. I think remote working can be helpful for some people who might find it difficult to access transport, but then also make sure that people don't end up isolated in remote working. So if you offer remote working, then make sure that they also have ways to have social breaks with their colleagues. Listening to what your disabled employees need is important. Believing their experiences is important. Remote working can make things more accessible. Clear instructions and knowing who to turn to when you face a problem is also important. So those are just some of the things. I'm sure there's many others, but like those are some examples.
Have you done research abroad around people with disabilities and employment, and what was it like?
So as I said, some of the research data generation for this PhD project I did in Germany. In Germany, my fieldwork was interrupted by the COVID pandemic, so then I had to switch to online interviews, but I was still there. And for my master's degree, I actually did some research in Dhaka, Bangladesh, because I was very interested in the experiences of disabled people there, because the International Labour Organization quite often chooses Dhaka as one of the places that has sort of like model projects in inclusive employment, because a lot of the textile and garment industry is in Bangladesh. So, when we buy cheap clothes in the UK, a lot of them were made in Bangladesh. And they say that, sitting at the sewing machines can be quite accessible for people with physical impairments or even deaf and hard of hearing people, because it's a job that they can easily do and it's a big industry sector there. And I was quite curious about that, because at the same time you hear many bad things about the garment and textile industry in Bangladesh, especially after one of the factories collapsed in 2014, and a lot of people died. And my experience talking to Bangladeshi disabled people was quite interesting, because I assumed, I didn't speak their language. I had to come with a translator. As a white European person, I have quite a lot of social privilege. So I assumed that they would not tell me very much, or maybe not trust me, or like be skeptical. But I tend to find, even when I'm in a country like Bangladesh or Vietnam or Ethiopia, there tends to be this sort of intuitive understanding between disabled people across the world. Like, even though our economic situations are, of course, very different, the cultures in which we grew up might be very different. Some of our daily experiences might be very different, but there's recognition quite frequently where other disabled people will see me and have this understanding that I will understand some part of their lived experience. So in Bangladesh, I was very grateful and surprised how open people were with me and have, talked about how it's very difficult because even though the Bangladeshi government gives the disability benefit, it's very small money. A lot of the garment textile industry work is only in the cities, so they have to move away and leave their families to find work at all. And they have to go very long ways to the factories, and the buses are very crowded. And especially for disabled women, it can get quite dangerous sometimes. So they shared a lot of vulnerable, sensitive experiences, even though we were not speaking the same language. How the experience of facing inaccessibility seems to be quite a common understanding across the world among disabled people.
How important is lived experience when studying disability?
I think lived experience is quite important, and I can share a little story. When I started doing my interviews, before I did them, I said I wanted to do narrative life story interviews where people tell me about their lives. Still focused on paid work, but where they talk about their lives rather than just the topics. And I said I wanted to talk to people for about 2 hours. And one of my supervisors at the time, who was a non-disabled academic, said, "Oh, people won't talk to you for that long, maximum maybe 45 minutes." And I was like, "Oh, let's see. Okay, fine." He's the expert. He's been the professor for 15 years. But I had to kind of chuckle to myself when I then did my interviews. And on average, the interviews are 2.5 hours long. And my shortest interview is 52 minutes. But most of them take like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours. Because I think when disabled people ask other disabled people about what's really like to be disabled by society, to face disabling barriers, because we trust each other more, I'm likely to find out different things than if the same research were done by a non-disabled person. And so I think lived experience is really vital to even just build trust with your research participants to really understand what you're talking about. But sometimes there's a challenge there because I, of course, also have to separate what is my reading of people's experiences and where does my experience stop and their experience start. And sometimes doing that disentangling of my own experience and the interviewee's experience in the analysis of the data can be quite tricky. So there's some challenges with lived experience when studying disability, but I think the challenges usually mean that you get better insights from the research at the end.
What's your favourite part about your working on your PhD?
So I think one of my favorite bits must have been to get to talk to people and really hear about their story, because I love talking to people. I love getting to know new people. So even now it's like presenting at academic conferences, getting to know new people. But I also quite like reading about sort of different theories of why we've built society the way we've built it, and why certain policies don't work and why certain policies do work. Because I think it also, if I've talked to people and they've told me what their struggles are, I also sometimes use that to sort of plan for and anticipate certain problems in that I might face later on in my own life. Or sometimes other disabled people will say, "Oh, I got support from this organization and they were really great." Or, "Oh, have you tried this thing? This has really helped me." And so the great thing about being an insider researcher, like researching disability as someone who has the direct lived experience, is that you also gain lots of valuable information for your own life at the same time. Yeah, but talking to people and getting to know new people and connecting with people and just benefiting from that peer support is really one of my favorite parts.
What are your plans for the future?
So I'm not really sure yet because before COVID, I'm light on community support, and then after the COVID lockdowns ended, I had applied for adult social care support, but because we have such a shortage of care workers in England, I had a really hard time finding people who could give me the care and support that I needed, and so that slowed my research project down a lot. But I'm still committed to finishing it somehow. And I would love to later go into teaching because I really enjoy, as I said, talking to people and learning new things and also then passing on that knowledge. So I could imagine teaching at like one of the smaller universities that maybe do more applied courses in like health and social care or applied community studies. And I could imagine either doing that in Germany or doing that here or a mixture of both. Yeah, but really going into teaching and sort of peer support spaces and figuring out how the I've gained during the PhD can be useful for people. That's something I'm most interested in, I think.
That is all the time we have for today's show. We'd like to say a big thank you again to Inga for coming on the show and sharing information about her work with us. We hope you enjoyed answering our questions. Do you have anything you would like to add before we end the show?
I think I would just maybe add that if people want to look me up on Twitter, my Twitter handle is Cryptical Thought. So rather than with a T, it's spelled with a P. Yeah, and if people want to know more about my work or need advice or have interesting things to share about their experiences with paid work, I'm always happy to hear from people.
I want to say a big thank you, Inga. Quick, big thank you for putting this together and making this happen.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it, and the questions were really thoughtful.
Remember to comment, like, share on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. You can find us, search for the People First Podcast. Thank you for listening. See you next time.